fuck's going on? Oh.
It's recording.
All right. Whew. Another day. Up at 4 o'clock. Little overcast, drizzly. We went out, we conked a couple more fish. She actually let me catch one. I couldn't believe it. But then she had to come back and catch another one herself, so. We got 2 each today. Maybe I'll put the video. Oh, you might have seen a little bit of the video at the beginning of this video. I'll put the ending at the end of the video. How's that? Now, finally fed, relaxed. And I'm going to sit here and get some more voices heard. Why? Because there's thousands. Literally. Thousands. Waiting to be heard. Now listen to this one. I dug in my folders here, and I believe I found some people that have been waiting for a while. This looks like it is a freaking book. But what not better time to go in than the first one of the day, right? We'll see how we make out after that. Steve, sending again because I don't think you're getting my emails. Apologize if you're receiving this multiple times. I know it's super long, but I promise it's worth the effort to read. Thanks, John. You got me. You got us this time, John. So here we go. Steve, first off, I want to say thank you for speaking up about these things. So much that you have said lands very close to home with me. I figured I'd try sending this email to Share My Story email. I don't know if it got through to the Tell My Story address. For some reason, it keeps getting kicked back. It's probably full at the time. In the last 15 months, I think I've sent it to you maybe 6 or 7 times, and it keeps showing up in my drafts folder like I never sent it. Just one more weird happening associated with these things. I am sending it from my Gmail account this time, and just in case emails from my Hotmail account are getting blocked by a firewall. Hotmail's still around. Crazy. I think that's what Sarah has too, actually. Kind of funny.
Never gets full.
She's right here, by the way. The elusive Sarah. I wanted to send you an email about my experiences with Sasquatch. Please don't hate me for the length of this email. Once I started typing, it was like I just had to purge. This is in no way all of my encounters. I have so many that most have become afterthoughts. Feel free to use these in your videos or to contact me with questions. I have many more encounters. If you're interested, I'll take some time to put more to paper. Maybe I'll write a book one day. Do it. If you got that many and it's interesting and it's knowledge-filled, do it. So first, a little about me. My name is John. Please don't use my last name. While I'm not concerned with the ridicule I would get from my friends, family, or the public, I work in the nuclear power industry, and it requires me to pass extensive background checks and psychological evaluations. So, I don't want the flack that a Google search might stir up. I'm from South Carolina, and most of my encounters have taken place in South Carolina. I'm 46 years old, and have been an avid outdoorsman my entire life. I started fishing as soon as I could hold a fishing pole. I've been hunting since I was 10, mostly whitetail, wild boar, and turkey. When I was 17, I got into gold prospecting. And when I was 18, I started backpacking. All adventures that I still do regularly. I also keep honeybees. Long story short, I'm in the woods 35 to 40 weekends a year, and I typically camp off-grid wherever I am when I'm out. In the last 30 years, I've spent thousands of nights camped in places where people just don't go. I never went out looking for these things, and I never wanted to see one. However, as the encounters have become more common, they have drawn me in, and I've recently, the last 4 years, started looking for them and trying to learn more about them. I've never been affiliated with any research organizations, and none of my encounters have ever been reported to anyone other than my close friends. I personally have come to terms with these things being out there, and I try not to let it affect the things that I love to do. But I'd be lying if I said they don't dominate my thoughts when I'm out there. I'm sharing this because there's a chance that talking about my encounters might help someone else come to terms with their own encounters. I know it seems kind of morbid, but the thought that makes me able to keep going back is, if they wanted me, they would already have me. I've been seeing and encountering these things since about 1993. So far, I have had 8 visual sightings ranging from 300 yards to as close as 30 feet, and an uncountable number of encounters without a sighting. Far too many to send you in a single email. For the last few years, the encounters happen almost every time I go out, especially if I'm solo, not as regularly as when others are with me. You name it, I've probably had it happen. One of my sightings, 4 of them, have been while I had a firearm in my hand, but for various reasons was unable to shoot. Those reasons are, number 1, regardless of whether I was holding a 7mm mag or a 45 ACP, I've always felt that I was undergunned to bring one down. Number 2, they look far too human. I couldn't convince myself that it wouldn't have been murder. And number 3, I've been around them enough to know that they are rarely alone, and the one you see is usually not the closest one. Number 4, on one particular frightening encounter, my pistol jammed at the same time when I actually feared for my life and thought I might have to shoot in self-defense. Coincidence? I don't think so. That's a familiar statement. We may have read this, but I'm going in. Over the years, I've come to the conclusion that I cannot shoot one. I believe they are another type of human, and in my eyes and God's, I think it would be murder. It would have to be a life or death situation to make me shoot one, and I suspect it would be my last act on this earth. I'd guess that's correct. In addition to the 8 sightings, I've heard them whoop, howl, scream, growl, grunt, whistle, knock, mimic other animals, including mimicking the voices of friends who aren't present at the time. I've even heard them speak the samurai chatter that you occasionally hear about. I've had them bluff charge, and I've had them escort me out of the woods. I've had things thrown at me, and I've had trees pushed over the trails that I used to walk into my deer stands, while I was in my stand. I've been zapped with a static charge, hair standing on end feeling. And I've been zapped so hard that I hit my knees and couldn't breathe or otherwise function. I've experienced lost time. And I've been lost in places I know like the back of my own hand. During these times, I've seen my compass, watch and GPS units stop working. I've had them put thoughts directly in my head, and I'm fairly certain that paying attention to what they put in my head saved me from being attacked by them in the following moments. I'm fairly confident that I've had them steal 3 deer that I shot before I was able to track them. All 3 left good blood trails, ending in a bedding site with no signs that the deer ever left. Seasoned blood dogs turned away and ran back to the truck. There's a 4th deer that was shot by a friend of mine that dropped in his tracks and then disappeared before he could walk to it, 80 yards away in the open view. A puddle of blood at the kill site. No blood trail leaving. Again, dogs refuse to track. You seem to be interested in the high strange encounters, so I will forego telling you about the more mundane stuff at this time. I know you've probably never heard anyone refer to any Sasquatch encounter as mundane, but when you've experienced what I have, a single wood knock, a couple of whoops, or even a 9-foot-tall creature walking in the open 300 yards away or peeking around a tree at 50 yards just doesn't count for much. Wow. If you're interested in that stuff, I'll send you a Google Earth overlay that documents it in all of its boring glory. I'll stick to the high strange encounters here, and you're still going to hate me for the length of this email. Feel free to break it up if you want to. I'll start with the first encounter that really effed with me. It was not my first encounter. As a matter of fact, when this happened, I already had 2 visual sightings. This encounter happened while I was on a 10-day gold dredging trip. It would have been in June of 2016. I was solo, and I was camped 1.5 miles from the closest paved road, dredging in an area of the broad river that is nearly inaccessible. I've been there for 3 days. At 5 a.m. on the day 4, I was awakened by a series of 5 loud whoops. They were unmistakable, and I knew exactly what they were without a doubt. They were just on the edge of my camp, maybe 50 or 100 yards away from my tent. They woke me from a sound sleep into instant terror. I immediately grabbed my .45 and then cycled the action. Other than that, I was unafraid to move, and I didn't move a muscle until it was well past daylight. This trip was then cut short when I broke my finger. I was smashed by a falling boulder in my underwater excavation and had to leave on day 5. I did not hear or see anything else during that trip. I know that doesn't seem all that bad, but there is a second story that happened in the same location on the same 10-day gold dredging trip that took place 1 year earlier in June of 2015. And it really jacks up the weird/conspiracy vibe. It just wasn't recognized until the second encounter put the first into proper context. On that earlier trip, a friend and I were there dredging gold and camping on the riverbank. It was the second or third night we were there, and we were camping in hammocks, separated by 10 or 12 feet with a campfire between us. At 2 a.m., we were awakened by the sound of a helicopter flying down the river. Excuse me. My first thought was that someone had seen me dredging in the river and had reported me, and I was now being harassed by some law enforcement agency. Dredging is perfectly legal in this location. The helicopter returned repeatedly for the rest of the night. The helicopter was unmarked and had no lights. I was, and still am, confident that they were either law enforcement or military. The riverbank in this location is 35 feet above the river. At one point, the helicopter was in the river, with the rotors level with the river bank, trying to look under the tree canopy to where we were. They obviously had seen us on thermal camera. At another point, the helicopter dropped down into a clear cut on the other side of us between the river and the high ridge. This continued until I finally got up at daylight and waved at them while standing in an open spot on the riverbank in my underwear. From 2 a.m. and all the next day, I kept waiting for someone to show up and question me about why I was there. At the time, I was convinced they were either interested in us because of the gold dredging, or they thought we might be babysitting a patch of weed growing on the riverbank. No one ever showed up, other than the helicopter. Looking back, after the second encounter with the 5 whoops, I think the helicopter was either looking for the creatures or knew they were in the area and was trying to keep them away from us. I'll never know for sure exactly what was going on there, but both creatures were frightening. Both encounters were frightening. And that was the only 2 times I camped anywhere at that property. The property was a 1,600-acre hunting lease that I held for 4 years. The activity got so bad on that property that I ended up abandoning the hunting lease in October of 2018, while I still had 5 months of access and 2.5 months of deer season left. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was afraid one of my kids or one of my club members was going to get hurt, and all 5 club members agreed to walk away and not go back. We had each paid $1,000 for the 2018 hunting rights on that property. The next encounter that I'm going to tell happened on the same hunting lease in the fall of 2017 in South Carolina. We are allowed to hunt wild boar and coyotes at night. We hunt the wild boar over electronically timed corn feeders. A friend and I had set up 2 feeders about 400 yards apart, and we're hunting them for wild boar at night. The feeders had been set up and running for about 5 months. At this point, I'd had many encounters on this property. My friend had not. As it began to get dark, we both hear things being thrown around us. Some of the objects actually struck the feeders. Then these things started grunting, growling, whooping, and hollering. They started shaking the trees around us, close enough that we could see the trees moving in the canopy, but could not see the source of the shaking. At this point, fear is beginning to take a hold, and I really don't want to be there anymore. I toughed it out until I just couldn't take it anymore, and I bailed out of my stand and headed toward my friend. I made it about an hour. After dark. Excuse me. As I'm speed walking out, I can hear something on both sides of the dirt road following, just behind and beside me, 15 to 20 yards off each side. It's dark and I don't have a flashlight. It's a full moon, but I can't see shit. About halfway to where my friend is supposed to be located, I run into him walking down the road toward me. The first thing he says to me is, "Why are you effing with me in my stand? That's how people get shot." To which I replied, "Whoever is effing with you is also effing with me. I'm heading to the truck and you can keep up or get left, but I ain't staying here." They followed us all the way to our trucks. Later I asked him why he had come out of his stand and walked away from his truck toward me. He said he was afraid of what was between him and the truck. There were two of them that pushed him towards me, and two others that pushed me towards him. Then they pushed us both towards our trucks. Once we were at our trucks, things calmed down and the panic went away. And as we stood there talking, we began to hear them speaking to each other in what I now know is referred to as samurai chatter. They were maybe 60 or 80 yards away from us when they were doing this. We decided to leave. When we went back the next weekend, we found several 3-inch thick trees ripped out of the ground and several that were snapped off 4 to 5 feet off the ground. That night was the worst. But we were never able to pig hunt in the dark after that. We'd get messed with every time we tried. My theory is that these things were hunting our feeders just like we were, and they would move us out of the way by any means necessary. The longer we tried to tough it out, the worse the encounters would get. My friend got baptized with fire when it comes to Sasquatch encounters. He went from skeptic to knower in one single evening. He got to skip right over that believer stage that most folks seem to get stuck in. The next encounter I'm going to tell you about happened in November of 2018. When we abandoned this 1,600-acre lease in October of 2018, we started hunting public land. I'm not going to say where because there are currently no searchers looking in this area that I'm aware of. I was hunting on a point that ran down into a swamp. A couple weeks later, I'd seen an 8-footer peeking around a tree at me from about 50 yards away, and I'd found a small structure overlooking a game trail junction, so I knew they were in the area. However, the area was completely void of sounds that could be associated with Sasquatch. I found this odd. Sounds are almost always the first thing that catch my attention. But for some reason, not this time. So, during the full moon in November, I decided that I was going to deer hunt in the swamp on a Friday evening, then camp at the gate where the truck was parked, and then Saturday morning, go duck hunting in the swamp, all solo. So I went deer hunting Friday evening with absolutely nothing happening. And after hunting, I drove to town to get dinner. I brought it back and ate while sitting in my truck at the gate. It was about 2 hours after dark by the time I got back from town and finished eating. I decided that I was going to walk down the access road and listen for Sasquatch sounds in the swamp before I set up my camp back at the gate. I took a flashlight, but did not use it due to the light from the full moon. I opted to leave my .44 mag in the truck because I didn't want to get accused of night hunting on public land. I walked about 100 yards down the road and started to feel that skin crawl, hair standing on end feeling. Thought about going back for the .44, but decided not to. I continued down the road to about 400 yards from the truck, and at this point, inside my head, I hear a thought in my own voice say, "I'm going to smack this MFer in the back of his head." I knew this was not my own thought. There was no one else there for me to smack or to even consider smacking. I'd heard nothing move around me. All the sounds being made were coming from me. I quickly turned around, and behind me, 30 feet up the road, was a Sasquatch. He was 8.5 feet tall and 4 feet wide at the shoulder. When I turned around, he immediately bolted into the woods, tearing down everything in his path. I hauled ass back to my truck and drove 15 miles to the closest campground, where I slept in the front seat of my truck with the doors locked and my .44 laying on my chest. I went back the next morning after daylight and went duck hunting. found where he had been standing when he bolted. The ground was torn up in a patch. 9 by 12 inches, and I found the pine sapling he had been standing next to. And it was a little over 8 feet, and he was a few inches taller and slightly behind the sapling. The following weekend, I found a black, deflated mylar balloon tied to a tree next to where my truck had been parked. I think he may have left me a gift as a peace offering. I think I scared him more than he scared me. I continue to find new structures in this area and have had no more sightings or close encounters. I still haven't heard any sounds coming from this area. I think it may have been a lone male that lives here, and he has no one to communicate with, so he remains silent. I found a couple of different groups that live a few miles away from this location, and they all make the normal noises that I've come to expect from these creatures. Maybe he's an outcast or has something wrong with him. Maybe he's deaf. Who knows why it's different? But for some reason, this one stays silent. The next encounter I'm going to give you takes place on the new hunting lease that I acquired in June of 2019. Up to this point, I had found a few structures and had heard a few knocks and whoops on this property. And also I had been mildly zapped once when I was able to smell one and then get too close while looking for the source of the smell. So I knew they were there. I just didn't have a lot to go on yet. The encounter happened the first time we tried to camp on the property. It was during the full moon in August of 2019. A friend and I were camped on the property doing some work for a couple of days, trying to get the new hunting lease ready for the upcoming hunting season. At this point, I had had 7 visual sightings and too many non-visual encounters to count. Our friend had had no encounters at all, and he had seen a few structures and had heard a lot of stories told by myself and another member who's had lots of encounters. It was his first year as a member of our hunting club. We had sat around the campfire until about midnight, listening for sounds all around us, but hadn't heard much. So we decided to walk the roads and see what we could stir up. It was a very quiet night, and there weren't many noises that I could point out and say for sure it was a Sasquatch. I did hear several sounds that I suspect were mimicked animal sounds, but those are tough to count, especially when you're standing next to a person who is at best a skeptic, who is just curious enough to tolerate your bullshit. And we slowly walked into the property for about a mile before giving up and turning back, and it was around 2 a.m. Excuse me. And as we walked back, we both at the same time looked at each other and said, "Did you feel that?" We had both been zapped, with the static hair standing on end, feeling at the exact same time. Neither of us were using our flashlights due to the brightness of the full moon. We were both carrying handguns. Him a 45 ACP, me a 9mm. Neither of us thought to turn on a light. Both of us drew and cycled the actions on our handguns. At this point, I got zapped hard enough that I couldn't breathe properly. I pointed my 9mm into the darkness and began yelling at whatever was there. Neither of us could see anything, but we both instinctively knew exactly where we should be aiming. Our threatening posture and my yelling made it get worse, and the inability to breathe was combined with the inability to stand as both of my knees caved under my own weight. I now seriously feared for my life, and I had every intention of killing anything that wasn't my friend. I'm now hyperventilating and collapsing to my knees while aiming a handgun and yelling into the darkness. I grasped for a deep breath, forced myself to stand and take 2 steps toward whatever's there. I know most of the theories about what these things might be, including the theory that they may be demonic/angelic in nature. So, at this point, from pure desperation and fear, I invoke the names of God and Jesus Christ and demand that this thing leave me alone. I stopped breathing, hit the ground, and it felt like my heart stopped. I gasped for another deep breath, forced myself to stand and take 2 steps toward this thing again, and declared that I was not afraid of it, and that I would kill it with my bare hands if I had to. Again, I hit the ground unable to breathe. This cycle continued several more times until it finally stopped zapping me, and we walked back to camp. And as we walked back, I got 2 or 3 more mild zaps, as if it was saying, keep walking. We got back to the camp at 6 a.m. A walk that we both thought had taken 3 to 3.5 hours had actually taken 6. My friend witnessed all of this, but was only zapped the one time at the very beginning. As I was getting ready to go to bed, I noticed that my 9mm had, quote, stovepipe jammed, end quote, when I cycled it earlier. I've only ever seen this type of jam when a gun is ejecting a fired case. I've never seen it happen when an unfired case is getting cycled from the magazine into the empty chamber. I think this thing knew that I had reached a point where I was very willing to kill it, and it disabled my gun on purpose. I still don't know why neither of us thought to turn on a light. We both had very powerful lights with us, but for some reason, the thought never crossed either of our minds. We never saw whatever this thing was, and we never heard it make a sound, but it was without a doubt there, and we both instinctively knew where it was. After this, the property went quiet for a while. We found a few structures, got a couple of trail cam pictures that were at such close range all I could see was twisted hair, and heard a few knocks and whoops, but nothing too spectacular. We did hear some drumming in the middle of the day once, and we also found 2 broken arrowheads and some pottery shards that were just laying out in the open. We didn't think much of them at first, but they play into a later encounter, so I'll mention them now. I hesitate to mention this next encounter because it contains a method of tracking these things that actually works very well. I'm adding it because I know there are very few people who are proficient at the method. And I get the feeling that you know how dangerous these things can be. I'll let you decide if it should be shared with the general population. On the first weekend of December 2019, I was hunting on the property by myself. I was only hunting in the morning, and had really only made the trip so that I could top off my feeder so that it would make it through the holidays while my ability to get back was going to be spotty. I'd hunted the morning without seeing anything and was going on to fill the feeder. I parked the truck at the top of the hill, 150 yards or so away from the feeder, and as I was getting the first bag of corn out of the truck, I heard a clear, loud, distinct wood knock coming from somewhere between me and the feeder. Now I'm used to these things being around, and I try really hard not to let them affect what I do. So I continued on with what I'm doing as I haven't noticed the wood knock. I carry in 2 50-pound bags of corn and I top off the feeder. I do this while armed with a 45 ACP and a 7mm 08. Nothing else happens. But on the way out, I notice a new structure that has been built 20 yards behind my tree stand. It is clearly a hunting blind and is watching 2 trails that are going to the feeder. I snap a few pictures and head back to the truck. And at the truck, I put the 708 back in its case for the ride home and put the 45 back in its place in the dash. Then a thought pops in my head, quote, use the dowsing rods to see where it went, end quote. And I'll explain a little here. About 20 years ago, I started using dowsing rods to look for pockets of gold in the rivers where I dredge. I got really good at it. And most of the larger nuggets that I've found were pinpointed with the rods. I also use them in my work, electrical/telecommunications, to find underground conduits, wires, and cables. I've had lots of practice with them and rarely go anywhere without a pair. A couple of years ago, while dredging in a small stream, I got the feeling that I was being watched and decided to use the rods to see if they would point to the creatures. They worked frighteningly well and pointed out 6 different individuals that were surrounding and watching me. I never saw them or heard them, but I've seen the rods find so many different things that I trust them. As a matter of fact, I trusted them to the point that I was afraid to use the rods to track these creatures. However, it became a neat parlor trick that I would use around the campfire at night to scare the skeptics and non-believers. but myself and the couple of bad people who have, but myself and the couple of people who had been around to see me use the rods while prospecting and finding buried wires, and had had real encounters with the Sasquatch, were truly afraid to try tracking with them. So back to the story. So now, with both my firearms tucked away in the truck, I reached for my dowsing rods and began thinking of questions. They pointed out where the knock came from. They pointed out where the structure was. They pointed out that there were 3 creatures around me, but only one was close. And for some reason, I asked them to follow where it had gone, and they began leading me through the woods away from my truck and the firearms that I just put away. I followed them across the dirt access road and onto the next ridge. At that point, I started hearing wood knocks and quiet whoops on either side of me, but nothing came from in front, where the rods were leading me. I ignored the sounds that were trying to distract me from my target and continued to follow the rods. After following for about 150 yards down the ridge, I got mildly zapped, but just enough to make my skin crawl. I continued following the rods. For the next few hundred yards, the knocks and the quiet whoops continued on both sides of me, and I continued to get mildly zapped every 50 yards or so. That continued for about 400 yards total, until I came to the intersection of the main creek valley. And as I entered the valley, I was zapped hard enough to take my breath and wobble my knees, but I did not go to the ground this time. I continued to follow for a few more yards when I was zapped again and had a very distinct urge to stop following. The rods indicated that I was very close and should be able to see what was there, but I could see nothing. And then I heard a few rustling sounds coming from the spot the rods were indicating, but I could still see nothing. I took out my phone and filmed the area, but the resulting video shows nothing. Then a bunch of crows flew into the trees surrounding me and drowned out any sounds that I might have heard. And as I turned to walk away, I jumped 2 deer that had walked in behind me, and I don't understand why the crows and deer were there. I was not being quiet or standing still and had removed the camo shirt I was wearing before I left the truck. My top half was blazing blue and was not in any way hidden. The animals should have seen and heard me long before they got close to me. Nothing else happened as I walked back to my truck and left the property. So, back to the broken arrowheads. We do occasionally find arrowheads around here, but they really aren't that common if you aren't out actively looking for them. I typically find one every few years or so, completely by accident. The first one that I found was beautiful, white quartz, notched Stanley spear point that was laying right on top of the red clay dirt road. I collected it, and we searched the immediate area for other points. And we found what appeared to be a severely damaged partial point and two pottery shards. This made my 13-year-old son an instant Native American artifact collector, and he continued to blindly search everywhere we went on the property. The following weekend, he finds a much older Clovis point with the tip broken off. These 5 broken artifacts get placed in a Ziploc sandwich bag and put on the dash of my truck, where they ride for the next couple of months untouched. In the meantime, 100 miles away while I'm working, I find another white quartz point with a broken tip. This one I find on top of a gravel laydown yard outside of an electrical substation. Definitely not a place where it should have been naturally. I collect it and leave it sitting in the console of my work truck. Then my friend, the one that was with me when we got escorted out of the woods, finds another white quartz arrowhead with a broken tip in his backyard, laying on top of the grass. He collects it and keeps it. Then a couple of weeks later, he finds another white quartz arrowhead with a broken tip a few feet away from where we found the first one. He collects it, keeps it as well. He's lived there for almost 20 years and has never found an arrowhead there. Then on the weekend of December 12, 2019, I heard 3 distinct wood knocks come from the woods behind my house. The next morning, I noticed that the Ziploc bag containing the first 2 points and the pottery shards had disappeared from the dash of my truck. The truck hadn't been broken into, and nothing else was damaged or missing. I searched the whole truck thinking maybe they had bounced off the dash or maybe I'd moved them for some reason, but they are nowhere to be found. It'll be interesting to see if the others go missing in the near future. The arrowheads went missing 6 days after I followed the creature with the dowsing rods. I lived deep within the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and they had never followed me home before that week, and I don't think they were happy that I was able to follow them. And they made sure I knew they were there and that they took back the arrowheads. Excuse me. Update. In June of 2020, while I was cutting grass at the hunt camp, my truck alarm went off like someone was trying to get into my truck. Thinking that I'd probably bumped the key in my pocket, I reset the alarm and kept cutting grass. Later, when I went to the truck, I noticed that all of the arrowheads and pottery shards had been returned. Still in the same Ziploc bag they were originally in and placed in the same spot where they had been taken from the dash. Sounds mildly familiar. August 2020, my skeptic, but beginning to believe friend, goes in to check on his new feeder that he had set up for the upcoming deer season. There's mosquitoes in here. I think he got me the top of the head. Damn it. Sorry. Goes in to check on his new feeder that he had set up for the upcoming deer season. The feeder has been in place and running for 3 weeks, long enough that there should be some deer using it. I'm working on another project in another location on the property, and I get a text from my friend saying that his brand new feeder has fallen over and is smashed. I drive over to see how bad the damage is, and as I'm walking in, I notice a new structure in a new location that overlooks a parking area. Then 50 yards later, there is a small sapling that is being pulled down, blocking the trail. When I get to my friend's deer stand, he says, "I don't think it just fell over." Upon looking at the damage, one of the legs had been ripped off, and there was a large hole smashed in the side of the barrel. It was definitely more violent destruction than would have happened from a simple falling over. The leg that was ripped off was 1 1/4 inch square tubing that was gusseted where it was angled. This steel was bent 180 degrees out of place, and it was bent in the gusset. We removed the busted feeder and didn't hunt there all season. We didn't know it at the time, but a review of the trail camera that was watching the feeder later showed a 6-foot-tall figure in the last picture taken before the feeder went down. Can't say exactly what the figure is, but the best I can describe would be a shadow figure. It appears more as an absence of light than as a solid figure. I'll attach the photo if you want to look at it. It's difficult to see. It blends into the darkness of the night almost perfectly. The figure is to the left of the feeder and is easiest to see if you look closely at the profile of the pine trees. And once you see it, it really jumps out at you. I've added a copy of the picture that has the figure circled, as well as a copy of the unaltered original. That same night that we found the busted feeder, we camped on the property. Another member came down to hang out with us and shoot the shit around the campfire. This is the same guy that was with me when we got escorted out of the woods while hog hunting. By now, he's a knower. And like myself, most encounters don't surprise him. His girlfriend, on the other hand, thinks we're all batshit crazy. So, as we tell him about the busted feeder and show him the pictures of the damage, she begins snickering and prodding and joking about all the crazy stories we make up. As it approaches 11 p.m., I ask her if she wants to go for a walk, and find out if my stories are real or made up. She agrees, and all 4 of us begin a slow walk up the dirt road leading into the property. At this point, none of us have seen the picture of the shadow figure that smashed the feeder. We left the campfire and the lantern burning at the campsite. It's a moonless night and it's so dark you can barely see the ground we're walking on. But we move slowly, feeling our way down the road without using flashlights. And by this time, I'm in the habits of always using dowsing rods when I go looking for these things. Not so much to track them, but more as an early warning system to let me know where and when I should be paying attention. Didn't take long. I picked one up less than 80 yards from camp. It had obviously been watching us. Of course, she's not believing any of what is happening and is joking and having a grand old time. And as we move up the road, the creature begins to move towards camp. And I can tell it's circling behind us. The rods are tracking its every move. I tell her to watch the road between us and camp because I think it's going to cross behind us. We're only 120 yards from camp, and the lights from the fire and the lantern are still very visible. And as we stand there watching the road, she sees a black 6-foot figure cross the road silhouetted in the lights from the camp. It crossed within seconds of when the rods indicated it would. She became unglued and wanted to leave. We talked her into going a little further up the road. We made another 150 yards, and I began to get that feeling that I was pushing too far and was not welcome. And I got zapped a few times, and we decided to go back to camp. The following day, we did some more work on the property, getting things ready for deer season. The last thing I needed to do was fill the feeder that was down that same road we had walked the night before. And as I'm driving up the road, I catch a quick glimpse of a jet black 6-foot figure. I slam on the brake, put in reverse. And I back up thinking I saw a figure, but fully expecting to find that it was a burnt tree stump. Whatever had been there was gone. There was nothing there. A week later was opening youth day of deer season. We had 5 different dad/son hunting groups on the property. My son and I went to hunt this same feeder. And as we're walking down the road, my son, obviously startled, begins scrambling for cover. It's like he's trying to climb into my backpack all of a sudden. He's 14. And I asked him what scared him. He said he had just seen a black shadow walking through the woods and that it was about my height, and I'm 6'6". 2 other dads and sons had walked up this road on their way into their stands 5 minutes before we had come up the road. Apparently it was creeping along behind, watching them. And we accidentally snuck up behind it. In just over a week, we had 3 visual sightings. Sorry, there's dust or something in here. Man. In just over a week, we had 3 visual sightings and a trail cam pic of what I believe was the same 6-foot jet black shadow figure / Sasquatch. Halloween 2020. On Friday, October 30th, I was at the property hunting by myself. I'd gone down early enough that afternoon to hunt and had some very minor activity while out on the property. Nothing special, just a few knocks and some quiet whoops. Stuff most people wouldn't either notice or would blow off as non-specific forest sounds. However, I'm at the point where I'm always listening and questioning how and what made a sound. I really do think it's a hyper-focus bordering on being a form of PTSD that comes with knowing these things are real and that they exist everywhere. Long story short, I notice when things are even slightly off. So I hunt Friday afternoon and then camp Friday night. It's been raining and the ground is wet, so I just slept in the front seat of my truck. At 5 a.m., my alarm goes off, and I get up and go into the woods to relieve myself. When I get back to my truck, I have the urge to lay back down for a few more minutes of sleep. I'm on no real schedule, so I lay back down. And when I sleep in the truck like that, I always crack the windows an inch or so just to let fresh air in and to keep the windows from fogging up as bad. It also lets me hear some of what's going on outside the truck. And as I lay there, trying to get 5 more minutes of sleep, I hear 2 people talking. It's not loud enough to tell what is being said, but it's definitely something talking. I think the truck radio must be on with the volume turned down, so I check the radio. The key is on the dash, and there's no possible way the radio's on. The talking continues, low and undistinguishable, but definitely there. There is no one else on the property, and the closest house is a couple of miles away, and it's 5:15 a.m., and I should be completely alone. The talking continues for over 15 full minutes. I was never able to make any of it out, for what was being said, or even what language it might have been. It was just whispering. But I could tell it was 2 different individuals, and it had started after I went into the woods to use the bathroom. As it was happening, I got the feeling that I should stay in my truck. I locked the doors and cuddled up in my 45. I did not get out of the truck until well after daylight. I gladly skipped that morning hunt. January 2nd, 2021, the last weekend of the South Carolina deer season. January 1st was the last day of regular season. January 2nd was youth hunting day. And on Friday, we hunted with nothing really happening. On Saturday, I found a footprint. I don't normally find many prints. The ground here is hard red clay and just isn't great for tracks. The mud holes are great for tracks, but these things tend to be smart enough to stay away from the mud. However, it had been raining a lot this fall, so the ground was much softer than normal. I guess this made it possible to leave a track. There wasn't much to see. It was just a general foot-shaped depression in the wet leaves. It really could have been someone's size 12 boot print, except that none of us had walked through that area for a couple of weeks. But even that still didn't rule out a trespasser. Shortly after finding the print, I started hearing a lone coyote howling. It's just past 12 noon, and the coyote's really out of place. They tend to be mostly nocturnal around here, especially when the human activity is high. The coyote continues without a break for 45 minutes. I pass it off as a hunter trying to call a coyote on the neighboring property, but I'm not convinced. As we're packing up to leave Saturday evening, we're standing at the trucks talking about what we've seen that evening, and there's a loud, monotone howl that lasts 4 or 5 seconds, almost like a wolf howl, but it didn't sound canine. It never broke tone like a wolf or coyote howl does. Also, we don't have wolves in South Carolina. And this howl, came from the same area where I'd found the print earlier and repeated every minute or so for 15 or 20 minutes. I broke camp as fast as I could and left the property. Thanks for listening. I hope my encounters help someone else feel like they are not completely losing their mind. It's been said before, but I'll say it again. I don't believe in Bigfoot. I know without a doubt they exist. I encounter these things in some form or fashion at least 50 or 60% of the times I go out nowadays. They definitely affect my hunting and where I choose to make camp when I'm out in the bush. I had to stop being a scout leader because I was afraid that I was drawing these things in close to the kids. If you're ever down this way, feel free to get in touch. I'd love to take you out hunting or just sit around a campfire and shoot the shit with you. I'm not too far from Scott Carpenter. I'd love to sit down and talk with both of you if you ever manage to come this way. If you want to contact me, feel free to email. All right, man, I got you. And here's the photo. I'm just on my phone, so it's... a little challenging for me. All I see, obviously, is going to be a circled dark area between two trees. For me, have to be played with, lighten it, darken it, but more importantly, it'd be better off to put a person there as well. Maybe at the same time of the evening, I don't know. But either way, that's a whole shit pile of experiences. A lot. I wonder why you. You ever wonder that? Why you? I wonder that a lot. Why me? Why me? But my gut says go with it, so I'm not stopping. Now, what do I do with this photo? I'm going to have to save that to get it into your video. Save that one. And save that one. And there we go. Another member or 3 of the Club of No Return right there. Appreciate you, man. If you're still hanging out here, email us back some updates, all right? Let me know how this journey's been going for you. I'm curious to hear about it myself. That's a long email. But you know what? I'm going to do one more. A few thoughts and experiences is the title of this email. Steve, I've listened for a long time and appreciate what you do very much. I've noticed that sometimes you'll share experiences that are not 100% visual, and so that makes me realize that you are looking at the broader topic. Being a hunter and outdoorsman, I'm sure you can appreciate that statement, as there are many more nuances and more senses involved with any experience other than the eyes. I'll try to keep this brief, as I know your time is valuable. My name is Jim, and I live in the Northeast Washington State, 40 years old, and a freak for the outdoors, exploring, berry picking, mushroom hunting, animal hunting, hiking, and camping. All my adult life I've spent every extra minute in the woods in the Colville National Forest as well as the Mount Baker National Forest when I lived in Bellingham. I've had about 6 experiences that I would dare insinuate could be Sasquatch related. Half of them were in my childhood, and realized in retrospect, as I learned more about these beings, the other half were as an adult, and I was aware enough to know. Number 1. Approximately 1996, camping with my stepdad, we were 20 miles up the St. Joe River in North Idaho. We camped on a sandbar. At about 2 a.m. in the morning, I heard a massive kerwump splash in the river, and at the time I attributed it to about a 35-pound trophy cutthroat flopping in the night. Looking back, there was a large cliff at that spot on the river overlooking our campsite. This may or may not have been a Sasquatch, I realize that, but now have heard nearly 50 encounters where the witnesses had large rocks thrown in the river at night. Number 2, approximately 1997. I was looking over Bailey Lake in the Colville National Forest with my stepbrother. I took him to a 1,000-foot cliff overlooking the lake. The lookout was about 500 feet from the plow on the road. We walked out and began to throw rocks. To our right, about 40 feet away, we heard a loud snap, turned and froze. All there was a small, scraggly bush, maybe 10 feet, and we both looked intently, but with all my effort, I could not see what I could plainly hear was there. It continued to crunch and snap until we bolted, and I mean flew. At the car, my brother kept saying, "What was that?" over and over. And as I asked what he saw, he claimed he saw a shoulder through the bush that had long, wavy brown hair and was tall. There were free-ranging cattle there, but none had long, shaggy brown hair. And if there was a cow in that bush, I would have seen it. And that's all. And that's all to that story. But 2 years ago, a local researcher found and photographed a mother and child bare footprints in the spring mud of Bailey Lake, just below the cliff we were at. The prints were large and large stride, I believe 18 inches on the adult. Number 3. Colville National Forest, Iron Mountain. I drove my Subaru up an old dead-end road on the backside facing north out of the view of the town. When I stopped my car by a creek and stepped out, I heard what I thought was the mountain coming down. I braced myself, expecting to see car-sized boulders jetting out of the cedar grove toward me, but nothing appeared. It went on for over a minute. But regardless of how loud and close it seemed, I never saw a thing. The ground was even shaking. I have no idea what that was, but it sounded like a locomotive engine was rolling sideways down that toward me. Typo, big deal. Who knows? Number 4, approximately 2006, Colville National Forest, berry picking, 49 degrees northeast basin. My wife and I were picking all day and filling a cooler. It was the end of the day, and we each had 1 more gallon to pick. We swore a blood of oath to finish. Not really, but we split up and began picking hard. But halfway through our last gallon, it was becoming dusk, out, and a wave of tiredness washed over me. And then I heard my wife's voice. "Jim, I think we should go." My gut reaction was, no, we're finishing what we set out to do. But immediately, when I thought this, I heard the loudest internal voice I've ever heard say, "Listen to your wife's intuition and leave now." I thought, okay, no problem. But she never said, "I feel like we should go." Anyway, I teamed up with my wife, grabbed our cooler, and we waddled down this trail. When we were inside of the car, we set the cooler on the trail and sat on it together, snuggling and kissing, when a huge snap came from our right about 10 feet away. We stood up frantically, or trying to see what should have been plainly visible right in front of us. It continued to break massive branches, and I yelled, "Are you a person? I have a gun and I will shoot. Show yourself." Branches continued to break, and I fired off a warning shot, expecting something to bolt, but nothing did. Then, crack! Another 3 or 4 inch limb breaks, and we're gone. We made it to our car, and years later, I still don't know for sure, but based upon the experience and how close the sound was, I should have seen whatever it was. Ironically, several years later, I listened to an account of a First Nations boy in the Colville tribe say that his grandmother told him to never pick berries at night and to leave at dusk, or the Stick Indians would kill him or chase him out. That their people had an understanding and honored that. He broke the rule one time and was chased out with rocks and stick breaks, from what I recall. Number 5 and 6, Bellingham, Mount Baker, NF. My family was growing, and we had a favorite place in the woods. It was the end of a road with a cutout log landing, cedar grove, and a place to shoot. My boy and I brought some overgrown zucchinis to shoot up, and we left them there. The next day I was still jonesing for the woods, so we went back. And as I'm looking around for the zucchinis, I smell a faint poo odor and can't see anything left. And at that moment I realized that there are big loaves of gray fecal matter spread all over the ground, and was stepping in some. This stuff was like 4 inches wide and smeared or spread all over a 4-inch area where the zucchini were. No human or beast I know could do that, and it smelled and looked human. So unless some massive man emptied his trailer bilge there overnight, I had no logical explanation. Inspecting by the fire pit, I noticed a handprint twice the size of mine smeared and stuck over a 2-inch span. 2 inch or 2 foot. A couple days later, I went back with my family, and after I started a fire, and while kids were playing and making noise, I faintly heard what sounded like a woman getting her arms tore off deep in the forest. I almost charged out, but realized we saw no other vehicles, and were at the end of the road. I shushed my children, and my wife could also hear, and we noticed it continued for some time, much longer than a human could scream. We left. Another strange one was in Bellingham 6 years ago. We were near the mouth of the Nooksack River and Bottomlands, and had an apartment there on the edge of the forest. One day my neighbor came up to me and asked if I was screwing around outside his window the night before, about 2 a.m. He said he opened his curtains to look out back for some reason, and something jumped, crashing away across the yard, and then crashed over the chain-link fence to our neighbor's overly wooded backyard. We went over to the fence, and it was all smashed down and bent. At that same place, when we got back from a trip one night and taking luggage in, my wife came in frantic, saying some huge animal was out back by the dumpster, clapping its teeth and throwing gravel at her. I ran and nothing was there. I ran out and nothing was there. Anyway, I know this is a huge email, so I understand if you don't read it. If you do, I'd like to share a few thoughts, because now I'm well studied and have thought this subject through. I believe 1,000% that Sasquatch are real, and they are much closer to us and probably have eyes on us more times than not when we are in the woods. I have no reason to doubt the thousands of credible testimonies I've carefully listened to, not only from normal everyday people, but people whose testimonies could grant us a death sentence. I'm pissed like you are at the bullshit, bias, and stupid human behavior of doubt, and like you, I give people an articulate earful when they scoff at the subject. I tell them that what they are doing is the reason we don't know the truth publicly, because they are cultured and brainwashed to not trust anything but the official narrative. I believe the reason Ron Moorhead was successful in obtaining his recording is because they were hidden deep within a stick structure, and maybe this was the ticket for them to be so close. I also believe Scott Carpenter's approach of a back camera is smart, because these things outclass us in the woods and would never, unless by accident, let us see them or give us time to pull out a camera. I've long wanted to use pin cameras with SD cards and insert them in dead wood with a drill, or make a camera trap, and when a piece of food was taken, it would then begin recording. They seem to see infrared. Thank you for being out there and doing what you're doing. If even a tenth of us had the kick-ass attitude you do, the world would be a much better place. Sincerely, Jim from Northeast Washington State. Wow, I didn't realize that was a long one when I first started it, so I just did 2 honkers in a row. Holy cow! And that's definitely some people who know what's up. Holy, I am done now. Yeah. Time for some nap. Quick thought I forgot to mention, though, a friend of mine up north, Cowboy, at the ranch we used to work out of outfitting, he knew how to use dowsing rods, and he just took 2 welding rods, took about 3 inches, bent it at 90, and maybe 24 inches out, and the other one the same, and he held them loosely in his hands, and we were trying to find a water line, and we're trying to find an underground water line going from the main ranch house to a smaller house up the hill, over the lawn. And he walked over top of it, and those dowsing rods went ding, just like that, when he stepped on top of the water line. And he stepped past it, whoop, went back out, whoop. And we're talking dead over top of a 3-inch line. Perfectly. So I have seen the dowsing rods work firsthand. Do I believe they can track these beings? I don't know. Haven't done it. Sounds like it makes sense to me. I wonder how many people are going to go run around the forest trying it out. I don't know. But anyway, there you go. Now what am I going to do? Something. Quick little nap, and then we're going to go see if we got some prawns in the traps, maybe. And then one more day of fishing, and then we got to go home. What day is it? Saturday. We'll be out here tomorrow somewhere, so hopefully I'll wake up alive again, and I'll be back tomorrow. And anything you are curious of that we have to offer here, Sarah stickers are still in the store. Fishing, we may have a few days fishing opened up. That link's down below. And the email. You want to email in your truth, your encounters, whatever you got. You feel the people need to hear it, you can email it in the link below as well, all right? I'll be back tomorrow. Oh yeah, I finally got my first fishy. Oh. Keep digging, keep digging. Whoa! Oh, it's a nice one. Oh, yeah. Oh, jumped right out of the water right here.
We keep going?
Yeah, keep jigging. Oh, yes.
We'll get the one back from yesterday.
Ready?
Yeah.
Under the chin, deep. Deep under the chin. Deep, let go of the bag. Oh yeah, bag them, hold them down. Right there. Yes. Look at that. That's a beauty. Hey? Yes.